We're following breaking news tonight out of the Middle East, where the United States and the United Kingdom tonight carried out targeted strikes against Iran-aligned Houthi militants in Yemen. Those militants have been attacking commercial shipping routes in the Red Sea, one of the world's busiest waterways, and declaring that the attacks are to protest Israel's military campaign in Gaza. But in a statement tonight confirming the attack, President Biden said the strikes in the Red Sea have gone well beyond Israel, affecting more than 50 nations, and that crews from more than 20 countries have been threatened or taken hostage in acts of piracy. Earlier this week, the American and British navies shot down at least 21 drones and missiles from Houthi rebels in the area, intending those shots as a warning. For months now, the Biden administration has been trying to avoid a wider conflict in a region already in turmoil. But Houthi rebels have continued to target the shipping routes, and their leaders have said they are comfortable with a direct confrontation with America. Joining me now is Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor in the Obama administration and co-host, of course, of Pod Save the World. Ben, thank you for being here tonight. This seems like just an extraordinarily difficult line for the White House to walk, calibrating how much is enough to try and get the Houthi rebels to stop, and how much is too much that will draw the U.S. into a war with Iran. I mean, what do you make of the decision here and the sort of careful calibration?
I think this is a pretty major escalation, Alex. There's no question that the U.S. military has a responsibility and a right to protect shipping in the Red Sea. There's a commonly understood right to freedom of navigation, the right of ships to proceed without harassment. And so the idea that you would take military action against Houthi ships that are harassing those container ships and other vessels in the Red Sea, including U.S. military vessels, that's one thing. To go after the Houthi kind of command and control infrastructure and the Houthi bases in Yemen, that is a different thing. And that's what the administration had restrained from doing until this point. And the reason why is once you do that, you potentially open a Pandora's box, because they are connected to a network of groups that could take action against the United States in Iraq, that could escalate the war across the region in Yemen, that could ultimately lead to a regional war that draws in Iran. And so the stakes in this are enormous. The viewers may be looking, why does this matter so much? It's because if this gets out of control, if this spirals, this could lead to a truly regional war. And that's what we want to avoid.
I mean, and that was, I remember shortly after October 7th wondering, and I think I asked John Kirby at the time, what prevents this from becoming an actual war between the U.S. and Iran? And here, not that I'm some sort of Cassandra, but, that was the Iranian sort of shadow in all of this has been constant. And I wonder, against the backdrop of South Africa calling Israel to the International Court of Justice for claims of genocide, the degree to which the U.S. is drastically rethinking its relationship to Israel in this war in Gaza.
Well, look, the reality is the longer the Israeli military operation goes on in Gaza, the more there's risk of escalation in various places. We see right now the risk of that escalation in Lebanon, where Hezbollah could be, which has been going tit for tat back and forth with Israel, that risks boiling over into a conflict in which there's essentially a war in Lebanon. You see it in Iraq, where the U.S. has taken military strikes in Baghdad, which we rarely do, because of Iranian-backed militias taking strikes and shots at U.S. military personnel in Syria. So Iraq could boil over. And now you see it in Yemen with this U.S. military action against the Houthis. And look, there's good reason to want to protect shipping in the Red Sea. That is an absolutely valid and necessary objective. At the same time, you're not going to defeat the Houthis militarily with just a few airstrikes. Keep in mind that there was a multi-year war against the Houthis backed by the U.S. I think a mistake in the Obama administration to begin to support the Saudi-led effort to go after the Houthis that did not eliminate the Houthis. So you're not going to eliminate them in 4 airstrikes if several years of a military campaign didn't. And so I think what we're seeing now is just the risks that the longer the war goes on, the longer this goes on in the Middle East, the more one of these pots could boil over. the more that there's a risk to U.S. service members. And the administration is balancing against trying to protect things like freedom of navigation, trying to deter Iranian-backed proxies from doing things to escalate. But at the same time, we're kind of getting drawn in. There's a quicksand component. And I can say this, Alex, as someone who's been in the White House for 8 years. The Middle East has a kind of quicksand component where it can draw you in. And the last thing anybody wants is a full-scale regional war. But unless there's some diplomacy here, that's the momentum that I feel happening right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, and you talk about that. You mentioned the Obama administration with Yemen. Joe Biden was, of course, part of that administration. Joe Biden oversaw the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. He knows well these lessons. You know, can you talk a little bit about just sort of the chain of command in terms of the decision making here? I ask this mostly because the Secretary of Defense is in the hospital and has been there for some time. He's still issuing some statements, but you've been inside these rooms. I mean, this is very much Biden's call. It always is. But given the fact that his defense secretary is not there, can you talk a little bit about how it sort of works in a crisis point like this?
Well, I think it becomes a very White House-centered thing, because when you are taking military action that is new, right? I mean, it's one thing when there's a strike against another ISIS target or another al-Qaeda target, or even in the context of the last several weeks, against a kind of Iranian-backed militia that is harassing our troops in Syria. This is a new thing to go after targets in Yemen, Houthi targets in Yemen. That crosses a new line, a new legal line, a new military objective, and that ultimately becomes a White House decision, a presidential decision. So I'm sure there have been a flurry of meetings over the course of the last several weeks about how do we stop this harassment of shipping in the Red Sea? How do we stop these attacks on U.S. military vessels in the Red Sea? You have those meetings at various levels, and ultimately it gets teed up for President Biden. Here's the spectrum we can do. We can continue to go after the Houthis in the Red Sea when we see them, or we can go after them in Yemen. And ultimately, that comes to his desk, and the Defense Department is going to carry that out. The Defense Department presents a range of options. Here's what we can do. We can do this in the Red Sea. We can do this in Yemen. You can decide how far to turn that dial. And I think what we see with President Biden today is a degree of frustration with what the Houthis have been doing in the Red Sea, but also a degree of willing to take some risk here, because the Houthis are likely to respond. And it may not just be in Yemen. It could be other Iranian-backed militias in Iraq going after U.S. targets there, or the U.S. embassy there. He's risking that in favor of trying to send a message that, hey, back off the shipping in the Red Sea. We mean what we say. You can't do this.
Indeed, the Houthis have said preemptively they are comfortable with a direct confrontation with America. And so we leave it there. Ben Rhodes, my friend, always good to see you. Thank you for your expertise and time tonight.